before empires carved their names into the bones of the earth, before banners of conquest rippled beneath 1,000 suns. There was silence filled with wind, dust, and the slow heartbeat of a restless land. This was the world before Genghis Khan, a world not yet united, but trembling on the edge of transformation, stretching endlessly between the frozen forests of Siberia and the sun-scorched plains of northern China. The Mongol steppe was both beautiful and brutal. It was a place where survival was an art form and mercy was a luxury no one could afford. The air itself seemed to hum with ancient tension, the whisper of hooves, the crack of bows, the cries of wolves hunting beneath the starlight. Here, clans lived and died by the rhythm of the seasons. The winds carried their stories, but never for long. Tribes warred endlessly each, one clinging to its pride, its herds, its right to exist. The Tahitiad, the Karites, the Tatars, the Merkit, they fought for grazing lands, water, and revenge. There was no single ruler, no central law, only the code of strength and the certainty that weakness meant extinction. Yet out of this chaos, something began to stir quiet inevitability, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The Mongols, scattered and feuding, shared one unbreakable trait: resilience. They had learned to endure hunger, blizzards, betrayal, and loss. And in that endurance lay the seed of destiny. Among the endless horizons, the gods of the steppe Tengri, the eternal blue sky watched. Some say it was fate that chose this barren land to forge a conqueror. Others believe it was desperation that forged him instead. In these lonely expanses, where men spoke to the sky because there was no one else to hear them, a child was born. His name was Temujin. No one could have known then that the dust of these plains would one day darken half the known world beneath his army's march. The tribe saw only another boy, another life caught between starvation and slaughter. But the wind carried a different messenger, murmur of change, of unification, of wrath wrapped in destiny. For now, though the steppe slept, its silence masking the storm that was coming. And when it broke, the world would never be the same. They said he was born holding a blood clot, in his hand a sign. The elders whispered that this child would one day conquer the world. Temujin was not born into power. He was born into betrayal. His father, a minor chieftain named Yasuge, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was still a boy. Overnight, his family was cast out, abandoned by their tribe, left to starve on the cold plains. His mother, Holan, taught her children to live off roots, wild berries, and the marrow of frozen bones. Hunger became their teacher. Survival became their religion. It was in these years that Temujin learned that loyalty was fragile, and fear was the truest currency among men. He grew up watching the horizon, learning its moods, memorizing the silence between gusts of wind as if it spoke to him. Every scar, every betrayal, hardened him into something new, something the steppe had never seen before. When he was captured by the Tahitiad and locked in a wooden kang, he didn't beg. He waited, he watched. And when the night was darkest, a sympathetic guard set him free. That moment, the breaking of his chains, was the birth of Genghis Khan in spirit, if not yet in name. He began to gather followers, not by fear but by loyalty. Warriors who had been betrayed by their own clans, outcasts who had no banner to fight under. They came to him because Temujin promised something no other warlord did: unity. He spoke of a new order where strength and merit mattered more than bloodline, where the steppe could rise together instead of tearing itself apart. Slowly, tribe by tribe, he forged alliances through marriage, cunning and war. His charisma was quiet but magnetic. His justice was swift, his vengeance unforgettable. He destroyed the Tatars in retribution for his father's death, broke the power of the Taishiad, and absorbed the Kerets through both diplomacy and conquest. By 1206, on the banks of the Anan River, the tribes gathered and declared him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. Beneath the eternal blue sky, a new empire was born, not of land, but of will. The man who had once hunted mice for food now commanded tens of thousands. His armies moved like storms, his strategies like water fluid, relentless, impossible to contain. Yet in his eyes there was no triumph, only purpose. He had united the tribes, but the steppe still whispered for more. Beyond those endless plains, other worlds waited, richer, softer, unprepared. The storm had found its voice, and now it would move. The steppe could no longer hold him. The horizon that had once confined Temujin now beckoned like an open wound waiting to be conquered. Genghis Khan, as he was now called, turned his eyes outward to the great cities beyond the grasslands, two empires grown fat on silk and stone. His armies moved like shadows, disciplined and ruthless. They struck with the speed of lightning, disappearing before the dust had settled. To his enemies, they were ghosts. To his followers, they were destiny in motion. He began with the Tangut kingdom of Western Shire, testing his new war machine against walls and fortresses. The Mongol army was no longer a horde of riders. It was an instrument of precision. Every soldier knew his place. Every arrow had its path. Every order carried the weight of law. After crushing the Tangut, Genghis turned to the Jin dynasty, the proud rulers of northern China. The Jin had believed themselves untouchable behind their great walls and massive armies. But they had never faced a force that moved as one mind. Genghis's strategies were unorthodox, blending terror with mercy, siegecraft with psychological warfare. Cities burned, yet others surrendered without a fight, terrified by tales carried on the wind. From the yellow plains of China to the cold forests of Siberia, the world began to bend beneath the Mongol hooves. Then came Khwarezm, empire of traders and scholars, rich with gold and arrogance. When the Shah of Khwarezm executed Genghis's envoys, he sealed his empire's fate. The Mongols swept across Persia like a divine punishment, annihilating cities, shattering armies, erasing kingdoms that had stood for centuries. No fortress was too strong, no river too wide. The world had never seen conquest on this scale, not by land, not by speed. Genghis did not seek wealth or pleasure. He sought order imposed through fear. To him, chaos was the enemy, and if the world had to burn to be rebuilt, then so be it. His empire was not merely expanding, it was transforming. Roads were built, trade revived, and messengers could cross continents without fear. The Mongol code, the Yasa, governed warriors and citizens alike. Even as cities turned to ash, a strange kind of unity emerged beneath the eternal blue sky, a world stitched together by conquest, yet pulsing with a new rhythm of connection. And yet, as the borders grew wider and the map redder, Genghis began to sense the fragility of what he was building. Conquest was simple. Control was harder. The storm he had unleashed now stretched across half the world, and still it hungered. By the time Kublai Khan ascended to power, the Mongol Empire had become a living, breathing world unlike any that had come before. The steppe-born warriors of Genghis had settled into cities, palaces and courts, and the roar of hooves had softened into the hum of bureaucracy, trade and culture. Kublai, grandson of Genghis, looked eastward and saw China not as a prize to plunder, but as a realm to rule with vision, blending Mongol strength with Chinese sophistication. He moved the capital to Khombolek, what we now know as Beijing, and here the empire reached a scale both grand and overwhelming. Palaces rose like mountains of stone and timber. Markets swelled with goods from every corner of the known world, and scholars, astronomers, and the engineers found patronage unlike anything they had ever imagined. Under Kublai, roads were rebuilt and expanded, connecting distant provinces with relays and postal stations, and the Silk Road, long fractured by war, flourished under Mongol protection, allowing caravans to cross deserts and mountains with unprecedented safety. Yet, for all the grandeur, the empire was a delicate balance of cultures, languages, and religions. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans practiced freely under the Yasa, a Mongol law code that demanded obedience but allowed belief. Kublai's court became a hub of ideas. Persian astronomers calibrated celestial movements. Chinese engineers designed canals and observatories, and scholars compiled histories that would survive centuries. The Yuan dynasty, as Kublai's rule came to be known, was both a continuation of the Mongol vision and a transformation of it, a fusion of conqueror and administrator, warrior and sage. Yet, beneath the splendor, tensions simmered. The nomadic Mongols, though ruling the vast lands, remained a minority in China. Local populations, accustomed to centuries of their own dynastic rule, chafed at foreign governance, and Kublai's expensive campaigns drained resources while ambitions of expansion strained loyalty. To the west, Mongol relatives ruled in the Chagatai Khanate and the Golden Horde, each adapting to their regions in unique ways. And the unity of Genghis's empire began to feel like a memory, fragile and fleeting. Still, Kublai's vision left an indelible mark, a world more connected, more literate, more aware of itself. And yet, as the Khan looked upon his vast dominion, he could not foresee that the threads holding it together were fraying, that the storm his grandfather had unleashed was beginning to scatter. What happens when the empire that seemed unstoppable begins to strain under its own weight? The answer would come in the centuries that followed, in ways both devastating and transformative, shaping the future far beyond the steppe. The empire that once stretched from the Pacific shores of China to the heart of Europe began to fracture, not with the crash of armies, but through the slow erosion of unity, culture, and ambition. After Kublai Khan's death, the Yuan dynasty struggled to maintain control over a population far larger than the Mongols themselves. An internal dissent, corruption, and rebellion gnawed at the foundations of authority. In the Western Khanates, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia were also drifting from the center, each blending more deeply with local traditions, religions, and politics. Over time, Mongol rulers became less the ferocious steppe conquerors and more regional monarchs, governing through alliances and vassals. Their military might still formidable, but increasingly constrained by geography, logistics, and local resistance. Economic strain and bureaucratic complexity amplified these pressures. The enormous infrastructure that had once bound the empire, roads, relay stations, trade networks, relayed networks, required maintenance and resources that were no longer evenly distributed. Famines, plagues, and natural disasters further weakened central authority, and ambitious generals and nobles carved out spheres of influence, sometimes disregarding orders from distant capitals entirely. In China, The Yuan dynasty faced a series of peasant uprisings fueled by resentment of Mongol privilege, heavy taxation, and displacement of the local population from administrative and economic power. Meanwhile, the Black Death spread along the Silk Road, decimating populations and disrupting trade routes, leaving whole regions depopulated and the economy in chaos. In Persia, the Ilkhanate's reliance on Persian administrators could not prevent succession crises, internal rebellions, and Mongol-Persian cultural blending that diluted the original military hierarchy. In Russia, the Golden Horde still exacted tribute, but its grip weakened as Russian principalities grew stronger and more organized, ultimately culminating in Moscow's rise and the symbolic end of Mongol domination. Fragmentation was inevitable, a combination of overextension, cultural assimilation, and the sheer difficulty of holding together one of history's largest contiguous empires. Yet even as the political and military power of the Mongols waned, their influence persisted in the regions they once ruled, embedded in trade networks, technological innovations, administrative practices, and cultural exchanges. The empire's decline was not simply an end. It was a transformation, a diffusion of power and ideas across continents. And as the last Mongol rulers faded from their thrones, the question lingered: could an empire so vast, so unprecedented in scale, ever truly vanish? Or had it left seeds that would continue to shape the world for centuries to come? Even in decline, the Mongol Empire left an imprint that would reverberate across continents for centuries. A silent architecture of influence, shaping trade, culture, science, and governance in ways that are often overlooked in history books. Their roads and relay stations, the Yam created arteries across Eurasia, allowing merchants, travelers, and emissaries to move with unprecedented speed, carrying not only goods, but ideas, technologies, and knowledge. Some historians suggest that, without the Mongol network, the Renaissance in Europe might have been delayed, as classical texts, mathematical innovations, and scientific instruments traveled west along these paths. The Mongols themselves were surprisingly cosmopolitan for conquerors. They tolerated religions from Nestorian Christianity to Islam, Taoism to Buddhism, and shamanism, creating a climate of intellectual and spiritual exchange that was rare in the medieval world. In Persia, the establishment of the Maraga Observatory and the work of astronomers like Tusi bridged Islamic astronomy to Europe, laying foundations that would influence Copernicus and the eventual heliocentric revolution. In China, Kublai Khan's patronage of mathematicians, physicians, and engineers resulted in new forms of measurement, calendar systems, and even dietary studies, while libraries and observatories preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Trade flourished under the Mongol umbrella, particularly along the Silk Road, with merchants enjoying protection and privileges that allowed for the circulation of silk, spices, and precious metals across vast distances. Their influence on governance was subtle but enduring. The use of meritocratic administration, codified law, and bureaucratic oversight in Mongol-controlled regions offered models that local rulers would adapt for centuries. The Mongols also left genetic footprints, as studies suggest that a significant portion of the modern population across Mongolia, Central Asia, and parts of Eastern Europe descend from the same Y-chromosomal lineage linked to Genghis Khan. Militarily, their strategies of mobility, intelligence, psychological warfare, and siegecraft would be studied and emulated long after their dominion faded. Yet beyond the tangible, the Mongols left a more enigmatic legacy, the idea of possibility, of a human polity stretching across the known world, binding disparate cultures, languages, and landscapes under a single vision, however fleeting. Their empire posed questions that linger to this day. How far could ambition stretch across continents? What might have happened if these horsemen of the steppe had turned westward beyond Europe, or eastward into lands unknown? The Mongol legacy is one of paradox. Immense destruction intertwined with cultural flourishing, ruthless conquest alongside tolerance, short-lived political power that seeded centuries of enduring influence. And as we peer into the map of the medieval world, it is impossible not to wonder, what if the Mongols had not stopped where they did? What if the Atlantic had been the next horizon for their unstoppable march? Imagine, for a moment, the endless steppe giving way to the vast forests and rivers of Western Europe, the sound of hooves thundering across lands never before touched by the Mongol Empire, the horizon stretching not into Asia, but toward the Atlantic Ocean itself. Some historians speculate that had the Mongols pressed further west, the entire course of history might have been rewritten. The kingdoms of Europe, still fragmented and wary, would have faced a force unparalleled in mobility, discipline, and psychological warfare. Cities like Paris, London, and Lisbon could have fallen under the shadow of Tartar banners, their walls tested not by siege engines alone, but by relentless cavalry and fearsome coordination that seemed almost supernatural to contemporaries. Trade networks, already thriving under Mongol oversight in the east, might have merged with Western markets centuries earlier, bringing silk, spices, and exotic knowledge directly to the heart of Europe, potentially accelerating the Renaissance, or even altering the trajectory of science and exploration. Some scholars argue that such a westward push could have prevented the rise of certain European powers or shifted colonial ambitions, redirecting the currents of empire long before the age of discovery. The cultural exchanges, already rich in the East, might have spread far more rapidly westward, introducing Mongol-influenced administration, military organization, and religious tolerance to territories that would otherwise develop independently. And yet, the environment, geography, and the dense political tapestry of Europe may have posed challenges the Mongols had never faced. Fortified cities, dense forests, and rival kingdoms that could unite in defense. Diseases, weather, and supply lines stretching into unfamiliar lands might have slowed their relentless advance, perhaps forcing them into a different kind of empire, one more regional than global, yet still transformative. The ripple effects of such a hypothetical conquest extend into the imagination. Would the Americas have been reached earlier through Mongol-influenced maritime exploration? Would the Columbian exchange have taken a radically different form? Perhaps the spread of ideas, technology, and religion would have fused Eurasia and Europe into a hybrid civilization, where the steppe's traditions mingled with European culture in ways we can only speculate. The very thought challenges our understanding of possibility, of how a single, unstoppable force of human ambition can reshape the fate of continents. And as we return from this realm of speculation to the actual map of history, one cannot help but feel a shiver of both awe and unease at the paths not taken, the doors never opened, and the empires that might have been. The question lingers: if the Mongols had reached the Atlantic, what world would we inhabit today? As the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific shores of China to the plains of Eastern Europe, a question emerges. How does one govern a realm so vast, so diverse that it encompasses countless languages, religions, and cultures, The answer lies in an almost paradoxical combination of ruthless efficiency and surprising tolerance. Genghis Khan, the architect of this unparalleled domain, understood that conquest alone could never hold such territories together. It required administration, law, and an appreciation for the people under his sway. The Yasa, his codified set of laws, acted as the invisible spine of the empire, a rigid framework designed to regulate behavior, military obligation, and even trade practices. Yet it remained flexible enough to adapt to local conditions. Under Gedai, the empire saw the beginnings of a sophisticated bureaucracy, where scribes, officials, and administrators drawn from conquered populations kept the wheels of the empire turning. Palaces were built not only as seats of power, but as symbols of order, grandeur, and cultural amalgamation, adorned with art, music, and literature from across Eurasia. In cities like Karakoram, one could witness the mingling of Buddhist temples, Muslim mosques, Christian churches, and Taoist shrines, each standing in quiet coexistence, reflecting the Mongols' strategic embrace of religious freedom to maintain social stability. At the same time, the empire's taste in the arts remained grounded in the nomadic past. Horse portraits, vibrant miniatures, and finely crafted tools spoke to a society that revered mobility, skill, and the natural world. Trade and communication were elevated to an art form through the yam, the empire-wide relay system that allowed messages, goods, and even people to traverse thousands of kilometers with astonishing speed. The Silk Road, already ancient, became the empire's lifeline, a conduit not just for silk and spices, but for ideas, scientific knowledge, and diplomacy. Astronomy, mathematics, and medicine flourished under Mongol patronage, with observatories in Persia and China charting the stars, physicians compiling treatises on diet and health, and mathematicians bridging the wisdom of East and West. Yet, amid this cultural richness and organizational brilliance, the shadow of violence always loomed. Conquest and administration were inseparable, and fear remained a tool of control. The Mongols' mastery of rule was both awe-inspiring and chilling, a testament to the delicate balance of power, pragmatism, and ambition that held an empire of unimaginable scale together. From one city to the next, from the steppes to the mountains. This legacy of governance and culture whispers a question that echoes across history. How does an empire maintain unity without suffocating the diversity that defines it? In an age when most of the world relied on slow, uncertain methods of communication, the Mongols developed a system that was nothing short of revolutionary. The yam, an intricate network of relay stations stretching across the vast expanse of their empire, connecting the steppes of Mongolia to the deserts of Persia and the forests of Eastern Europe. Imagine a messenger riding tirelessly across endless plains, the wind biting at his face, dust swirling around the hooves of fresh horses waiting at each station. The rhythmic thud of hooves, a heartbeat of the empire itself. These stations, called Gertag, were more than mere waypoints. They were fortified, well-supplied hubs with hostiles, stables, and even families stationed there to maintain operations day and night. A rider would travel roughly 40 kilometers to the next post, handing off their letters or goods to a fresh messenger or horse, ensuring that the empire's news, orders, and decrees moved at a pace that astonished contemporaries and historians alike. Records suggest that news of the Great Khan's death in Karakoram reached European territories within mere weeks, an almost unimaginable feat in the 13th century. The system was meticulously organized. Anyone bearing a pazer, A tablet granting special privileges could access these resources, while military and official envoys were prioritized even without one. Kublai Khan, in China, expanded the network further, introducing hostiles and relays for ordinary officials, creating a structure that relied on thousands of horses, oxen, mules, and even boats to ensure seamless operation. In harsher climates like Siberia and Manchuria, the Mongols adapted by using dog sleds to keep the messages flowing. Beyond communication, the yam became a lifeline for trade, diplomacy, and the spread of knowledge, offering merchants, travelers, and envoys protection, supplies, and a glimpse of the empire's reach. Yet, beneath its efficiency lay a subtle message. The empire was everywhere. Its presence felt not just through armies, but through the invisible threads of information that bound its territories together. Some historians suggest that the yam allowed for a level of coordination and central control that modern empires would envy, while others see it as a tool of surveillance, keeping local populations in check through constant oversight. The system also facilitated cultural and technological exchange, enabling scholars, astronomers, and merchants to traverse vast distances, carrying with them ideas, inventions, and curiosities that would ripple through continents. As we trace these routes across rugged mountains, endless steppes, and arid deserts, one can't help but wonder what stories, secrets, and innovations moved faster than the armies themselves, shaping a world that had never known such speed or connectivity. Sit back, relax, and imagine a world where the roads are alive with motion, where merchants, caravans, and travelers thread a delicate path across deserts, mountains, and rivers, all under the watchful eye of the Mongol Empire. The unification of the steppes under Genghis Khan brought an unprecedented peace, some call it the Pax Mongolica, that transformed ancient trade routes into arteries of global commerce. The Silk Road, long a patchwork of perilous paths, became a coherent network, stretching from the bustling markets of Chang'an to the Mediterranean ports, where spices, silk, and knowledge flowed in a ceaseless tide. Merchants were no longer mere traders. They were diplomats, envoys, and often the bearers of intelligence that shaped empires. Genghis and his successors encouraged foreign traders, granting them tax exemptions and protection, recognizing that commerce was not just wealth but influence. The Mongol elite engaged in autark partnerships, investing in merchant ventures that spanned continents, while Italian traders, including the family of Marco Polo, navigated these routes to reach lands few Europeans had ever seen. Imagine caravans crossing the Gobi Desert under a blazing sun, their camels laden with silks, teas, and exotic goods, while Mongol guards ensured the safety of every step, the distant mountains echoing the beat of hooves and human chatter. The roads themselves were feats of engineering, expanded and maintained to allow for the swift passage of goods and information alike. Under Kublai Khan, the Yuan dynasty in China maintained thousands of postal stations, while in the West, the Golden Horde and Ilkhanate financed relay systems to keep trade alive. Yet the Silk Road was more than commerce. It was a conduit for ideas, technologies, and religions. A place where the exotic mingled with the familiar, and where astronomy, medicine, and mathematics traveled alongside silk and spices. European missionaries, Chinese monks, and Persian scholars all traversed these paths, exchanging knowledge that would ripple across continents, subtly altering cultures and societies in ways few could anticipate. But as empires wax and wane, so too did these routes, The eventual decline of Mongol authority fractured these connections, and the once thriving corridors of exchange became vulnerable to local powers and emerging states. Still, one cannot ignore the audacity of an empire that, through sheer organization, vision, and sometimes sheer force, turned the Silk Road into a living, breathing network of the known world. And one must ask, what unseen transformations and cultural exchanges were lost when these roots began to crumble, leaving only fragments of the knowledge and treasures once carried along their windswept paths. Close your eyes and picture a world without phones, emails, or instant messaging, yet imagine messages crossing thousands of miles with astonishing speed, carried not by machines, but by riders and horses under the meticulous orchestration of the Mongol Empire. This was the Yam, an intricate relay system that acted as the pulsing nervous system of a vast empire, linking Karakoram to the farthest reaches of Persia, China, and Eastern Europe. The Yam was no mere postal network. It was a lifeline, a symbol of Mongol administrative genius and the unparalleled discipline that defined their rule. Along the routes, relay stations called Gurt O-Umlaut were lavishly provisioned, guarded and organized, offering fresh horses, food, and shelter to riders who could cover up to 200 kilometers in a single day, faster than the Pony Express would achieve centuries later. Every station was a node of efficiency, with attached households ready to service riders, ensuring continuity even in the most desolate terrains. Couriers carried messages for merchants, nobles, and military commanders alike, while the paisa, small, golden, or engraved tablet, granted the bearer immediate access to the system, signaling privilege and trust from the Khan himself. From the frozen expanses of Siberia, where dog sleds replaced horses, to the heat-soaked deserts of Persia, the Yam maintained the heartbeat of an empire that stretched over 24 million square kilometers. The system allowed the great Khans to govern with unprecedented reach, to mobilize armies, and to receive intelligence from distant lands almost in real time. It also facilitated diplomacy, allowing European envoys, Muslim scholars, and Chinese officials to correspond across vast distances, their letters bridging worlds previously separated by insurmountable barriers. Yet the Yam was not merely functional. It was emblematic of Mongol order imposed upon chaos, a demonstration that even across endless steppes and mountains, the empire could impose a rhythm, a cadence, an invisible hand guiding the flow of information. One can almost hear the echoing gallop of hooves along these ancient paths, the wind whipping past exhausted yet relentless riders, each carrying secrets, commands, or pleas that might shape the fate of nations. And yet, with all this organization, with all this reach, one must wonder, what messages were lost in the vast emptiness, what secrets never arrived, and what subtle shifts in history might have occurred had even a single relay faltered along these unstoppable arteries. Now, imagine the endless desert sands of Central Asia, the wind carrying the faint scent of camels and spices, the sound of distant hooves marking the rhythm of an empire that connected continents. The Mongols, fierce conquerors, were also surprisingly shrewd patrons of trade, transforming the Silk Road from a fragmented network of caravans into a conduit of global exchange that pulsed with the life of the empire. Merchants were no mere travelers. They were essential lifelines, bringing food, textiles, knowledge, and news from one end of the empire to another. Genghis Khan recognized the strategic importance of commerce early on, protecting merchants and granting them privileges that allowed them to traverse borders and deserts with unprecedented security. These traders became his eyes and ears, reporting on distant lands, foreign armies, and exotic technologies. Wealth flowed through Mongol hands, yet it was not hoarded, was invested into partnerships called ortak, a sophisticated system of trade collaboration with Mongol elites, resembling medieval banking practices while remaining flexible, relying on precious metals, goods, and even information as forms of capital. As the empire expanded under Gidai and Gyok, roads were widened, stations fortified, and the protection of merchants became a pillar of governance. Italian merchants like Marco Polo were able to travel vast distances under this system, as were Chinese monks and European missionaries, their journeys chronicling cultures, technologies, and political structures that had never before been witnessed by the outside world. Along these routes, luxury goods such as silk, jade, precious metals, and spices moved like a delicate thread, binding the Mediterranean to the steppes, linking Baghdad to Beijing, and creating a network that was as much cultural as it was economic. The Mongols ensured that caravans were protected from bandits, and losses were often compensated by local communities, a testament to the order imposed over chaos. Yet for all this prosperity, there was tension hidden beneath the flow of goods. The very same routes that allowed wealth to travel also carried disease, rumors, and political intrigue. Some historians suggest that it was along these roads that the bubonic plague began its deadly march from east to west, leaving a trail of death that would reshape entire civilizations. And so, the Silk Road under the Mongols was a paradox, a network of opportunity and life, yet also a potential harbinger of destruction. A reminder that every connection, every trade, carried consequences both seen and unseen. What unseen forces, what subtle shifts in fate were set in motion by the simple act of moving goods across these vast, unforgiving lands. Picture vast open steppes stretching to the horizon, winds whipping across grasslands, and in the distance, a lone rider appears, carrying a message that could alter the fate of kingdoms. This was the YAM, the Mongol Empire's revolutionary communication network, an artery of information pulsing across the largest contiguous land empire in history. Unlike anything seen before, the YAM relied on relay stations called Gurtig, strategically placed every 40 kilometers or so, where messengers could exchange exhausted horses for fresh ones, ensuring a relentless speed that could surpass even the legendary Pony Express centuries later. Riders covered over 200 kilometers a day, braving scorching deserts, icy passes, and treacherous rivers, guided only by their paisa, a tablet of authority granting access to resources and protection. These stations were more than waypoints. They were bustling microcosms of the empire, complete with households to care for horses, stores of food, and guards to ensure the safety of each envoy. Merchants, travelers, and diplomats alike could tap into this network, turning the YAM into a lifeline for commerce, diplomacy, and intelligence. When the Great Khan died in Karakoram, news reached Batu Khan's forces in Central Europe within mere weeks, a testament to the system's unprecedented efficiency. Gedai Khan had expanded the roadways, carving passages through the Altai Mountains, linking western Connaughts, and creating a web of connectivity that was both logistical marvel and strategic weapon. Kublai Khan later enhanced the system in Yuan, China, constructing specialized hostels for officials and ordinary travelers alike, managing an immense fleet of horses, oxen, mules, carts, and even boats to navigate rivers and lakes. In the frozen expanses of Manchuria and Siberia, dog-sold relays, substituted for horses, demonstrating the ingenuity required to adapt to diverse terrains. The yam was not just about speed. It symbolized Mongol control, enabling rulers to transmit commands, gather intelligence, and respond swiftly to rebellion or foreign threats. Yet, hidden beneath the efficiency was vulnerability. Storms, bandits, and human error could halt the wheels of communication, leaving entire regions in suspense, waiting for news that might never come. It was a system where every messenger carried more than a letter. They carried the pulse of an empire, the weight of decisions that could topple dynasties or save lives. And as we trace the roots of these riders, one can't help but wonder, how did such a network, stretching thousands of kilometers over hostile lands, alter the very perception of time, distance, and power in the medieval world? Imagine a world where caravans of camels creak under the weight of silks, spices, and precious metals, their bells echoing across deserts and mountains, a rhythm marking the lifeblood of a vast empire. This was the Silk Road under the Mongols, a network transformed by the Pax Mongolica, a fragile piece that stitched continents together. Merchants were no longer mere traders. They became envoys, diplomats, and information couriers, weaving stories of distant lands into the fabric of the empire. Genghis Khan understood the value of commerce early, inviting foreign merchants to traverse Mongol lands, offering protection and privileges unheard of before. Wealthy Mongol elites invested in autark partnerships, funding merchants across deserts and rivers, creating a system reminiscent of modern joint ventures, yet fueled by uncoined metals and tradable goods rather than standardized currency. Roads and relay stations ensured goods moved swiftly. From the bazaars of Samarkand to the palaces of Beijing, each stop a microcosm of global exchange. Among these traders, some brought tales of Europe, others carried news from Persia or India, and occasionally strange objects, mirrors, coins, or manuscripts arrived that would baffle local scholars. Marco Polo's journey eastward and Rabanbar, Salma's epic trek westward, embodied the possibilities and perils of this connected world. Each traveler a thread in a tapestry of discovery, risk, and cultural fusion. Mongol protection was not unconditional. Merchants were obliged to pay tribute, report abuses, and sometimes act as tax farmers. Their fortunes intertwined with the whims of local authorities and imperial decrees. Yet, despite oversight, the Mongol corridors thrived, facilitating the flow of ideas, technology, and even diseases, as the plague would later reveal. Under Gidai and Gayok, the system flourished. Under Mongolia, regulations tightened, commercial taxes formalized, and abuses curtailed, showing a keen understanding that commerce could empower or destabilize an empire. Roads that once seemed endless became veins of connection, threading through deserts, mountains, and steppe, uniting cultures that might never otherwise meet. And yet, for all this connectivity, the Silk Road remained a place of mystery, where the unexpected waited behind each dune or river crossing. Bandits, storms, or the whispers of distant courts plotting intrigue. In tracing these routes, one must ask, did the Mongols merely transport goods, or did they, unknowingly, carry the seeds of a globalized consciousness long before the modern world would emerge? Picture a messenger galloping across the steppes, the wind whipping his cloak, hooves thundering against the earth as the horizon stretches endlessly ahead. This was the yam, the lifeblood of communication in the Mongol Empire, a network so vast and efficient that news of the Great Khan's death could reach distant armies in Europe within mere weeks. At the heart of this system were relay stations, known as Gertag, spaced roughly 40 kilometers apart, each a sanctuary for exhausted riders and a place where fresh horses awaited, ready to carry messages further, faster, without pause. The stations were more than posts. They were small fortresses, guarded, provisioned, and often bustling with families, servants, and merchants who maintained the pulse of imperial communication. Anyone holding a peso golden or engraved tablet of authority could command passage and resources, while military envoys traveled without restriction, ensuring the empire remained connected across thousands of miles. Roads carved through mountains, deserts, and forests, each engineered with care. From the Altai ranges to the plains of Central Asia, and expanded relentlessly under Gede's command. Kublai Khan, ruling the Yuan dynasty in China, refined the system further, creating special relays for officials, ordinary relays for common travelers, and hostels stocked with supplies for long-distance journeys. His empire relied on over 1,400 postal stations, 50,000 horses, thousands of oxen, mules, carts, and boats, a logistical marvel stretching across continents. In the colder reaches of Manchuria and Siberia, dog sleds replaced horses, adapting the system to unforgiving terrain. Genghis Khan restored portions of the relay network in the Middle East, though on a more restricted scale, emphasizing its role for imperial envoys rather than commerce. In the Golden Horde, the yam was funded through a dedicated tax, reflecting its importance to governance and control. For merchants, travelers, and ambassadors, the yam was more than infrastructure, it was a lifeline, offering security, speed, and a semblance of order in a world of uncertainty. It enabled trade, diplomacy, and the exchange of knowledge across cultures, sometimes altering the course of history. And yet, for all its sophistication, the yam was vulnerable. Sudden storms, bandits, or political instability could disrupt the flow of messages, leaving empires waiting in anxious silence. One wonders, as these riders dashed across endless plains and rugged mountains, carrying imperial commands, personal letters, or news of conquests, what secrets were whispered in the wind, what destinies were altered by the speed of a horse, and how different the world might have been if a single message had been delayed or lost forever. Imagine vast deserts stretching beyond the eye's reach, caravans winding like snakes across sand and stone, laden with silks, spices, precious metals, and ideas. This was the Silk Road under Mongol rule, a network transformed from dangerous paths into arteries of empire. The unification of the steppes and subsequent Pax Mongolica created unprecedented stability, allowing merchants to traverse thousands of miles with a degree of security previously unimaginable. Genghis Khan had long recognized the value of commerce, encouraging foreign merchants early in his rise to power, not only for the goods they brought but for the information they carried, serving as eyes and ears across distant lands. Merchant partnerships, known as Ortak arrangements, flourished under his successors, Gedi and Gyak, linking Mongol elites with Italian traders, Chinese artisans, and Persian financiers, facilitating exchanges that spanned continents. Roads, way stations, and protective policies allowed travelers to move goods, but also ideas, technologies, and religions, weaving a fabric of connectivity from China's eastern shores to the Mediterranean. Marco Polo's journey eastward and the Chinese monk Rabban Bar Sama's travels westward illustrate the vast scale and ambition of movement along these routes. While papal envoys like William of Rubrach attempted diplomacy that relied on the Mongols' tolerance of foreign envoys, merchants, protected by imperial decrees, were shielded from bandits, and any losses could be compensated by local obligations, ensuring trust and continuity. Imperial oversight under Genghis Khan imposed regulation, demanding taxes and supervision, preventing abuses, and demonstrating that commerce was intertwined with governance. The roads themselves were marvels of engineering, carved through mountain ranges, bridged over rivers, and maintained for thousands of miles. They symbolized the empire's reach and ambition. And yet, despite this system's brilliance, it remained fragile, susceptible to political upheaval, natural disasters, and the very human greed of opportunists along the way. These paths carried not only silk and gold, but the seeds of knowledge, medicine, astronomy, and culture, subtly shaping civilizations even as empires rose and fell. It is said that the plague, later known as the Black Death, may have traveled these same routes, a dark reminder that the veins of trade could also carry death. As we trace the Silk Road across the Mongol world, one cannot help but wonder how these exchanges of wealth and ideas forever altered the destinies of continents, and what untold stories were lost along the sands, whispering secrets of power, ambition, and human endeavor. Sit back, relax, and imagine a world where news traveled faster than the fastest horse you've ever seen, where messages crossed thousands of miles in a matter of days, connecting distant lands under a single, sprawling empire. This was the Mongol Yam, a revolutionary mail system that turned the empire into a living, breathing network of information and control. At intervals of roughly 40 kilometers, relay stations, lavishly furnished posts offered fresh horses, food, and shelter, ensuring that couriers could cover remarkable distances, often exceeding 200 kilometers in a single day. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of instant communication, a lifeline that allowed Genghis Khan and his successors to command armies, send edicts, and receive intelligence with unprecedented speed. Not just the Khans benefited. Merchants, travelers, and diplomats could use the system with proper authorization, creating a web of connectivity that linked China, the Middle East, and Europe. Each relay station was more than a simple post-it, was a hub of activity, with attached households to provide services, repair equipment, and manage supplies. Paises, the official badges, granted the bearer access to these stations, ensuring priority and safety, while military personnel could bypass bureaucratic delays, reinforcing the Yam's efficiency as both a civic and martial tool. Roads carved through the Altai Mountains and extended through the Western Khanates symbolized not just the empire's ambition but its mastery of terrain and logistics. Kublai Khan expanded this system further in Yuan, China, building specialized relays for high officials, ordinary stations for merchants, and a network so vast it required tens of thousands of horses, oxen, mules, carts, and even boats. In Manchuria and Siberia, dog sleds replaced horses, adapting the network to extreme climates, demonstrating the Mongols' ingenuity. Genghis Khan revived the declining Yam in the Middle East, constructing hostiles and limiting access to imperial envoys, while the Golden Horde funded its system through a special tax, maintaining continuity and order. Through this intricate system, news of the Great Khan's death could reach forces in Central Europe within weeks, enabling coordinated responses across continents. Yet, the same routes that transmitted triumph and command could also carry whispers of intrigue, rebellion, and rumor, reminding all who used them that information was power, and power was always fleeting. As we follow the pulse of the empire through its roads and relays, we begin to see how the Mongols did more than conquer. They connected, coordinated, and controlled a world previously fractured, leaving a legacy that would echo long after the hoofbeats faded into history. Close your eyes and picture the vast expanse of Eurasia, a tapestry of deserts, mountains, rivers, and cities, all threaded together by the lifeblood of commerce, the Silk Road. Under the Mongols, these routes became more than paths for merchants. They were arteries of a global empire, pulsing with goods, ideas, and cultures. The unification of the Mongol Empire in 1206 and the peace it imposed across previously war-torn regions transformed trade into a near religion, a mechanism by which information, commodities, and even innovation flowed freely. Genghis Khan had long recognized the value of merchants not merely as traders, but as carriers of knowledge, diplomats, and agents of empire. They brought textiles from Persia, spices from India, silks from China, and ideas from far-flung corners of the world. The Mongol elite, acting as investors in these commercial ventures, partnered with merchants in an arrangement called ortak, providing capital, protection, and access to the yam while sharing in profits, creating a sophisticated economic network centuries ahead of its time. Roads were maintained meticulously. Cities flourished as trading hubs, and travelers, whether Marco Polo heading eastward or Rabon Bar Soma venturing west, became conduits of culture, religion, and intelligence. Merchants were often granted tax exemptions and legal protections, a recognition of their strategic importance, while also serving as conduits for imperial power, collecting tributes and managing financial networks across conquered territories. Yet this network was not without oversight. The Great Khan Mangi later introduced regulations to curb abuses, ensuring that the flow of wealth remained under imperial scrutiny. Every caravan, every messenger, every coin carried along these routes was part of a larger, intricate system that turned the Mongol Empire into the first truly interconnected Eurasian entity. The roads themselves bore witness to the empire's reach. Mountain passes, deserts, and rivers crossed with ingenuity and precision, each mile a testament to ambition and organization. Alongside trade, ideas spread, mathematical knowledge from the Islamic world, artistic styles from Persia, medical practices from China, and political concepts from distant lands traveled alongside tangible goods, creating a cross-cultural dialogue that would shape continents. But as with all empires, fragility lurked beneath the surface. The Silk Road's prosperity was tied to Mongol authority. When the empire fragmented, chaos returned, roads fell into disrepair, and the lifeblood of commerce slowed, leaving echoes of a network that once stitched the known world together. From one thriving trade hub to the next, the Mongols demonstrated not just conquest, but connection, showing the extraordinary power of an empire that could reach across continents without leaving the dust of its roads behind. Imagine a network so vast, so meticulously organized, that messages and orders could travel faster than any human had ever known, connecting the furthest reaches of a continent-spanning empire. This was the Yam, the Mongol Empire's legendary mail system, a marvel of administration and logistics that predated the Pony Express by centuries. Relay stations, called Gurtag, were spaced across the empire, each one a small fortress with fresh horses, provisions, and guarded quarters for couriers. Riders could cover nearly 200 kilometers in a single day, switching mounts seamlessly at each station, ensuring the flow of intelligence, commands, and commerce across deserts, steppes, and mountains. These stations were more than post offices. They were microcosms of the empire itself, staffed by households that maintained the animals, prepared food, and provided shelter. The system was egalitarian in its reach. Anyone carrying a pieza, a tablet granting official privilege, could access the yam, while even military personnel had priority. Kublai Khan expanded the system further in the east, constructing over 1,400 postal stations, using tens of thousands of horses, oxen, mules, and boats, ensuring that no corner of the Yuan dynasty remained isolated. In the west, Genghis Khan revived declining relay posts in Persia, emphasizing that only imperial envoys could receive stipends, while the Golden Horde financed its network with a special yam tax. This was not mere bureaucracy. It was the lifeblood of an empire, enabling rapid mobilization, the transfer of intelligence, and even the spread of news across continents. When the great Khan died in Karakoram, word reached Mongol forces under Bata Khan in Europe within weeks. An astonishing feat for the 13th century. Travelers, merchants, and envoys relied on this system for safety and speed, turning the yam into a symbol of Mongol ingenuity and discipline. Yet the system was fragile, dependent on the stability of the empire and the loyalty of those who ran it. Breakdowns in governance or rebellion along the routes could slow messages to a crawl, cutting the empire off from its own communication arteries. The yam was more than infrastructure. It was a reflection of Mongol priorities, their understanding that knowledge and speed could conquer just as surely as swords. Every horse hoof pounding the steppe echoed across continents. Every courier racing through night and storm carried the pulse of an empire that, for a brief golden age, connected worlds in ways few had imagined. As we leave the yam behind, we step into the lifeblood of trade and the Silk Road's bustling cities, where commerce, culture, and empire intertwined in ways that would echo for centuries. Picture endless caravans winding through deserts and over mountains, camels bearing silks, spices, and secrets, while merchants whisper of distant lands where the sun rises over gilded cities and the air is heavy with unfamiliar scents. The Mongols, often portrayed as brutal conquerors, were also masters of commerce, architects of a network that would later be known as the Silk Road, a trade artery connecting east and west, under Genghis Khan and his successors. Peace, albeit enforced with ruthless precision, allowed merchants to travel further and with greater safety than ever before. Early in his rise, Genghis actively encouraged foreign traders. Seeing their knowledge as tools for expansion, merchants were not merely suppliers of goods, but observers of cultures, informants, and sometimes unofficial diplomats. The Mongols institutionalized trade, creating partnerships known as ortak arrangements, where merchants and Mongol elites pooled resources, financed long-distance ventures, and shared profits. A system that allowed both parties to prosper without the constraints of conventional currency. Italian traders, including the family of Marco Polo, navigated these routes, their journeys chronicled in tales that would inspire Europe for generations. Yet the Silk Road was no single highway. It was a chain of intermediaries, a relay of merchants passing goods, knowledge, and technologies from one to the next. Roads were maintained and policed by the Mongol state, and imperial protection was offered to those with the proper documentation, ensuring that silks from China could reach Persia, spices from India could reach the courts of Europe, and ideas from mathematics to medicine traveled along with them. Rabban Bar Salma, a Chinese Mongol monk, journeyed west to the courts of Europe, while European envoys like William of Rubrach ventured east, each step demonstrating the Silk Road's reach. Even so, these journeys were perilous. Deserts swallowed travelers, bandits roamed, and political upheavals could sever links overnight. Mongol policies fluctuated, while Gedai and Gyak encouraged trade. Genghis Khan imposed stricter regulations, seeking to curb corruption and overtaxing. Yet the momentum of commerce persisted, and under the Yuan dynasty, imperial oversight continued to stabilize long-distance trade. The Silk Road was more than commerce, it was a conduit for ideas, cultures, and power, binding the Mongol Empire in a web of human activity that reshaped the known world. But even these golden arteries were not immune to decay. As the empire fractured in the 14th century, trade slowed, isolation crept in, and the road that had once pulsed with life began to fade into shadow, leaving us to wonder how different the world might have been had the Mongols maintained their grip on these veins of wealth and knowledge. Imagine the vastness of the Mongol Empire, endless steppes, deserts stretching beyond the horizon, snow-capped mountains standing like silent sentinels. And across this immense expanse, messages racing faster than any human could run. This was the Yam, the legendary Mongol postal system, a lifeline of information that bound the empire together. Relays of mounted couriers, riding day and night, would traverse distances of up to 40 kilometers before handing their dispatches to a fresh rider, their horses resting only briefly before galloping once more into the windswept plains. Genghis Khan and his successors meticulously expanded these networks, building ornate relay stations, known as Gurtag, equipped with provisions, horses, and sometimes even hostels for weary travelers. The speed and efficiency of this system were extraordinary. Messengers could cover 200 kilometers in a single day, a feat unmatched until the Pony Express 6 centuries later. Not limited to military communication, the Yam served merchants, envoys, and travelers, provided they carried proper authorization, a paper, which was a medallion granting access to horses, rations, and shelter along the way. The logistics were staggering. Under Kublai Khan, the Yuan dynasty maintained some 1,400 postal stations with tens of thousands of horses, oxen, mules, and boats, all coordinated to ensure the empire remained connected. Even the harshest terrains did not deter the Mongols. In Manchuria and southern Siberia, dog-sold relays supplemented equestrian routes, and in Persia, Genghis Khan restored the system, albeit on a smaller scale, ensuring that imperial orders reached distant provinces. The Yam was more than a network, it was a symbol of the empire's organization, its ability to project power, and its understanding that information was as vital as armies. Imagine a letter from Karakorum reaching Bata Khan's forces in Central Europe within weeks, a whisper of the Great Khan's command racing across continents, shaping battles, diplomacy, and trade. It was this invisible web of communication that allowed the Mongol Empire to govern a world spanning thousands of miles, a testament to their ingenuity and foresight. Yet, with all its efficiency, one cannot help but wonder, could such a system survive the empire's inevitable fragmentation? Or was it destined to unravel along with the vast domains it once served so flawlessly? Sit back, relax, and imagine a world in motion where goods, ideas, and cultures flowed along dusty caravan routes, stretching from the bustling markets of Constantinople to the sprawling cities of China. Under the Mongols, this ancient network transformed into something unprecedented. A superhighway of commerce and communication, often called the Silk Road, with the unification of vast territories under a single rule. Merchants moved with an almost unparalleled freedom, protected by imperial decree and the yam system. Genghis Khan recognized early on the value of these traders, not just as providers of exotic goods like silk, spices, and precious stones, but as conduits of knowledge, diplomats, and informants on distant lands. Under Gadai and Giok, the system of merchant partnerships, known as Ortak, flourished. These arrangements, often involving Mongol elites investing in trading ventures, allowed the empire to profit while ensuring that goods reached markets thousands of miles away. Imagine merchants from Italian city-states, like the family of Marco Polo, weaving their way across deserts and mountains, carrying everything from gold coins to stories of distant empires. While Chinese monks, envoys, and European missionaries undertook similarly epic journeys. It wasn't a single traveler completing the entire route, but a relay, passing goods and messages from one intermediary to another, each link in the chain essential to the flow of the Silk Road. Cities along the way thrived. Markets buzzed with languages, smells, and colors from every corner of the known world. The Mongols' encouragement of trade created a fragile, yet shimmering, network of prosperity that also had a darker side. Disease traveled these same routes. Some researchers suggest that the bubonic plague, which would devastate Europe decades later, likely used these same arteries to move from Asia into Europe, carried by merchants, soldiers, and the relentless wind of human movement. Even so, the Silk Road under the Mongols represents one of the earliest examples of global interconnectedness. A world where the empire's influence extended not just through swords and armies, but through commerce, knowledge, and cultural exchange. And yet, as the 14th century approached, the fragility of this network became apparent. With the empire fragmenting, trade would falter, routes would shift, and the golden arteries of connection would slowly decay. One is left to wonder, what would have happened if the Mongols had maintained control over these routes for centuries longer? How might the world have looked if the Silk Road never faltered, and the exchange of goods and ideas continued uninterrupted across continents? Picture the vastness of the Mongol Empire, stretching from the windswept steppes of Mongolia to the river valleys of Persia, and consider the challenge of keeping such an expanse connected. The secret to their remarkable cohesion was the yam, an early postal and relay system unlike anything seen in its time. Imagine a network of stations, scattered across deserts, mountains, and plains, each stocked with fresh horses, food, and lodging, guarded yet welcoming to travelers bearing the imperial paisa, a tablet granting the holder access to this extraordinary system. Messengers would ride tirelessly, sometimes covering more than 200 kilometers in a single day, handing off letters, edicts, and intelligence to the next rider with clockwork precision. It was not only the empire's armies that relied on this system. Merchants, envoys, and travelers of all kinds benefited, moving through a world that suddenly felt smaller, faster, more connected. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, roads were carved through treacherous terrain, including the rugged Altai Mountains, linking far-flung regions into a coherent whole. Kublai Khan expanded these roads further, establishing hostels and resting stations that would accommodate officials and ordinary travelers alike. And the scale was staggering. Some 1,400 postal stations, tens of thousands of horses, oxen, and mules, and even boats to traverse rivers and lakes. Imagine the constant rhythm of movement, hooves striking the earth, the rustle of letters exchanged, the murmur of traders passing news, and the hum of human ambition stretching across continents. In the Ilkhanate, Ghazan restored this system, albeit more selectively, ensuring that imperial communication could still function in a fragmenting empire, while the Golden Horde financed their stations with a special tax. Through this web of logistics, news of the Great Khan's death could travel from the heart of Mongolia to Central Europe in mere weeks, reshaping politics and strategy across the known world. Yet, as impressive as this system was, it relied on discipline, loyalty, and the relentless motion of men and animals. A single disruption, a bandit raid, a harsh winter, or a sudden conflict could sever vital lines of communication, leaving entire regions isolated. And so, even as the empire connected distant lands in unprecedented ways, it also revealed the fragility of human networks. One is left to ponder what might have happened if the Mongol system of communication had persisted, evolving into something more permanent. Could Europe and Asia have moved toward globalization centuries before anyone imagined? The answer hangs tantalizingly in the echoes of hoofbeats and the windswept corridors of the Yam asterisk. Sit back and imagine a world where caravans of camels and horses thread their way across deserts and mountains, laden with silk, spices, and treasures from distant lands. Moving under the watchful eye of the Mongol Khans, this was the Silk Road under the Mongols, a network of trade routes transformed from perilous paths into arteries of commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The unification of Eurasia under one empire created a fragile yet enduring peace known as the Pax Mongolica, where merchants could travel vast distances with unprecedented security. Picture Marco Polo making his journey eastward, navigating cities he had never imagined, or the Chinese monk Rabon Bar Soma venturing west, carrying letters and gifts from the court of Kombelik all the way to Europe. Along these routes, merchants were not merely traders. They were emissaries of information, culture, and technology. They brought news of distant courts, innovations in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, and ideas that would ripple across continents, often centuries ahead of their time. Under the Mongol system, merchants received protection, tax exemptions, and access to the relay stations of the Yam, ensuring their movement was swift and safe. Yet the Silk Road was more than commerce, it was a corridor of life and death. Goods could fetch extraordinary prices because the journey was arduous, the deserts merciless, and bandits always lurking. And it was along these very routes that the Black Death would later spread, a grim reminder that the same arteries connecting civilizations could also carry unseen peril. The Mongol investment in trade and infrastructure reshaped the economies of China, Persia, and Europe alike, creating new opportunities while also imposing control. As the great Khans monitored wealth and movement with a meticulous hand, some researchers suggest that without Mongol oversight, Europe might never have glimpsed the riches and knowledge of the East, and the Renaissance itself might have emerged more slowly or differently. Others note that this openness also exposed societies to profound risk, from disease to economic upheaval. In imagining the Silk Road of the Mongols, one sees not just merchants and caravans, but the pulse of an empire, the hum of cultures meeting and clashing, and the quiet power of connectivity stretching across mountains, deserts, and rivers. And as the sun sets over these distant landscapes, one is left to wonder, if the Mongols had maintained this global network for centuries, how might our world today look? And which civilizations might have risen or fallen in the shadows of this interconnected empire? Imagine a messenger galloping across endless steppes, the wind tearing at his face, clutching a letter that could change the fate of kingdoms. This was the Yam, the Mongol Empire's revolutionary mail and communication system, a lifeline that stretched across the vastness of Eurasia. From the frozen plains of Siberia to the deserts of Persia, relay stations known as Gurt-o-Umlaut were positioned like heartbeats along the body of the empire, each stocked with fresh horses, provisions, and guarded by vigilant watchmen. A rider could cover up to 200 kilometers in a single day, faster than even the legendary Pony Express 6 centuries later, carrying missives that bound together a realm larger than any in history. The Yam was not merely a postal system, it was a tool of control and intelligence, enabling the great Khans to coordinate armies, respond to rebellions, and maintain a fragile but effective grip over millions of people. Merchants, envoys, and travelers alike could access the Yam if they carried a paser, a metal tablet granting them the right to requisition horses and supplies, allowing information, goods, and ideas to flow with a speed previously unimaginable. The network was astonishing in scale under Kublai Khan. Thousands of relay stations, tens of thousands of horses, oxen, and mules, even boats and sleds in the north, ensured that the empire breathed as a single organism, despite spanning nearly half of the known world. Some historians argue that this network was as important as Mongol military prowess in sustaining their dominance, for an empire of such size required instantaneous knowledge of distant lands, armies, and rivals. Yet even this brilliance had limits: harsh winters, treacherous mountains, and the vast emptiness of steppe could delay riders, and the sudden death of a Khan or a regional leader could plunge the communication system into chaos. And still, the Yam carried on, a testament to the meticulous organization and ambition of the Mongols, allowing them to wield influence across thousands of miles without physically occupying every territory. As one imagines these riders racing through the night, letters tied to their saddles, carrying decrees, news, and secrets, it becomes clear that the Mongols were not just conquerors of lands, but masters of movement, masters of connection. And so, we must ask ourselves, what might the world have looked like if such a system had endured even longer? If the arteries of the Mongol Empire had continued to pump knowledge, commerce, and power without interruption? Sit back, relax, and imagine the endless caravan trails weaving across deserts and mountains, where the sun scorches the sands by day and frost bites the nights, where traders, diplomats, and adventurers tread paths that connect the extremes of the known world. The Mongol Empire, at the height of its power, did not merely conquer lands, it became the artery through which goods, ideas, and cultures flowed with an unprecedented ease. This was the Silk Road under the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative stability and security that stretched from the Mediterranean to the eastern edges of China. Merchants were protected, given official documentation and safe passage, their wagons and camels gliding through territories that might otherwise have been lethal. Luxury silks, spices, and precious stones traveled westward, while paper, gunpowder, and innovations in medicine and astronomy moved east. Marco Polo's stories, often thought to be exaggerated, capture only a fraction of this bustling exchange, as Italian traders formed partnerships with Mongol elites, financing ventures that spanned continents, while Chinese and Persian scholars exchanged knowledge, texts, and instruments, creating a subtle but transformative network of learning. The Mongols themselves were fascinated observers of this trade, sometimes participating directly through merchant partnerships, sometimes regulating it through taxation and relay stations, and often using it as a means of intelligence, learning about the strengths and weaknesses of empires far beyond their reach. The wealth flowing along these routes enriched cities, created cosmopolitan centers of culture, and exposed the Mongols to religions, philosophies, and artistic traditions from every corner of Eurasia. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Silk Road was fragile. The fall of the Mongol Empire in the 14th century disrupted these arteries, leaving trade vulnerable to bandits, political fragmentation, and the rise of new powers. Disease, too, traveled these routes, carrying with it the Black Death that would decimate populations across continents. A grim reminder of how connected the world had become. And so, the Silk Road under the Mongols was not merely a conduit of wealth, but a mirror of their reach, their vision, and their control. A delicate web that showcased the empire's brilliance and its limitations. From the glittering palaces of Khombolek to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, one must wonder if the Mongols had maintained this vast network for another century. How different might the history of trade, culture, and knowledge have been. Across the globe, close your eyes and picture the vast steppe, stretching beyond the horizon, dotted with yurts, fortified cities, and the occasional bustling marketplace, a land held together not by walls or rivers, but by a system of law and governance unlike anything the medieval world had seen. The Mongol Empire, though feared for its ruthlessness in conquest, was equally remarkable for its administrative innovations, a network designed to manage millions across continents. Genghis Khan, a man who had risen from the dust and chaos of tribal warfare, understood that raw force alone could not sustain an empire. He needed order, a codified system to unify disparate peoples. The Yasa, a set of decrees attributed to him, though secretive and partly lost to time, served as both a moral and legal compass, covering everything from military discipline to trade regulations, tax obligations, and even the treatment of prisoners. These laws transcended local customs, yet were flexible enough to accommodate the variety of cultures under Mongol rule. From the nomadic tribes of Central Asia to the settled civilizations of Persia and China, beneath the overarching Yasa, the empire was divided into administrative units, each overseen by appointed governors, many of whom were chosen for merit rather than lineage. A radical departure from the hereditary systems of the time. Taxation was organized efficiently, often based on household counts and livestock rather than arbitrary levies. And officials were held accountable through inspection and reporting networks that spanned the empire. Religious tolerance was another pillar of Mongol governance. Leaders from Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Taoist communities were granted exemption from taxes and allowed to practice freely, fostering a sense of stability and loyalty among conquered populations. Communication, too, was revolutionary. The yam, a relay system of mounted couriers and way stations, allowed orders, intelligence, and diplomatic correspondence to move faster than any army, connecting the distant reaches of the empire in ways that rivaled even the speed of light for its time. Yet even with such meticulous planning, Cracks would appear over time, succession disputes, local revolts, and the sheer difficulty of managing such a vast territory would eventually challenge the Mongols' ability to maintain absolute control. Still, the echoes of their governance lingered long after the empire's decline, influencing systems of law, administration, and diplomacy across Eurasia. And as we peer into these innovations, one cannot help but ask, could such a system born of conquest and necessity have survived if tempered with foresight rather than left to fracture under the weight of its own enormity? Imagine a vast continent, stretching from the windswept plains of Mongolia to the bustling cities of Persia and the towering walls of China, all connected by a network so precise and efficient that messages could traverse hundreds of miles in a single day, carrying the pulse of an empire. This was the YAM, the Mongol postal and communication system, an innovation that many historians consider the backbone of the empire's cohesion. Unlike the slow, fragmented messengers of other medieval states, the YAM was a meticulously organized relay system, with way stations placed every 25 to 40 kilometers, each stocked with fresh horses, food, and shelter for travelers. Riders, often elite warriors trained for endurance, could switch horses at these stations, ensuring that messages moved almost without pause. A logistical marvel in a world dominated by the limitations of human and animal stamina. The scale of this system was staggering under Kublai Khan. Some 1,400 relay stations were staffed and maintained, employing tens of thousands of horses, oxen, mules, and even boats for water routes, while in the northern and Siberian regions, dog sleds were pressed into service to traverse snowbound paths. The YAM was more than just a postal system. It was a lifeline of intelligence, diplomacy, and commerce. Imperial edicts, military commands, and tax records moved faster than armies, while merchants, travelers, and ambassadors, provided with proper documentation, could access protection and supplies as they journeyed through the empire. The reliability and speed of the YAM often determined the success of campaigns, the survival of envoys, and even the stability of entire provinces. Some scholars suggest that the rapid transmission of news about the Great Khan's death allowed for coordinated political maneuvers across the vast territories, preventing immediate collapse, while others emphasize how the YAM facilitated trade along the Silk Road, connecting the Mediterranean to the heart of Asia and fueling the flow of goods, ideas, and cultures. Despite its brilliance, the system required constant upkeep and oversight. Stations could fall into disrepair, horses could die, and political instability could disrupt communication. Yet, at its peak, the YAM was the circulatory system of the Mongol Empire, an invisible web binding together an otherwise sprawling and diverse realm. And as we trace the paths of these tireless riders across endless steppes and deserts, one question lingers. What might have happened if such a network had endured, evolving beyond its martial origins into the arteries of a lasting global empire? Sit back and imagine the endless expanse of deserts, mountains, and plains stretching across Eurasia, a world once fragmented into isolated kingdoms and tribal lands, suddenly unified under the shadow of a single empire. This was the Mongol Empire at its peak, and along its veins ran the arteries of trade, the legendary Silk Road. The Mongols didn't just inherit these routes, they transformed them, turning fragile caravan paths into a lifeline for commerce, ideas, and culture. Merchants traveled with unprecedented security, their caravans guarded by Mongol escorts, while imperial protection ensured that even distant, perilous stretches of desert could be crossed without fear of bandits. Goods flowed like a river, silks from China, spices from India, furs from Siberia, and glassware from the Mediterranean. But it was not just material wealth that moved along these roads. Ideas, technologies, and religions traveled as readily as silk and silver. From the far reaches of Persia to the courts of Europe, knowledge spread, seeding innovations that would later reshape civilizations. European travelers like Marco Polo marveled at the scale and efficiency of these routes, recording not only goods but also the cultures, customs, and wonders they encountered. In the opposite direction, monks such as Rabbon Bar Soma journeyed eastward, bridging the divide between Europe and Asia in ways that blurred the lines of geography and understanding. The Mongol Empire's support for merchants through partnerships known as ortak, tax exemptions, and access to relay stations created a climate where commerce could flourish across vast distances, creating the first truly globalized trade network. Yet, with such opportunity came peril. Disease, carried along the same routes that carried silk, would later reach Europe in the form of the Black Death, leaving a trail of devastation that some historians trace directly to Mongol-facilitated travel. Still, the empire's commitment to connectivity and exchange left a lasting mark. Cities along the Silk Road thrived, knowledge of distant lands expanded, and the stage was set for future explorers to dream of worlds beyond their own. And as we follow these caravan trails stretching endlessly across the steppes, deserts, and mountains, we cannot help but wonder what other secrets and connections might have remained hidden, waiting for a traveler bold enough to uncover them. Picture the vastness of the Mongol Empire, stretching from the rolling steppes of Mongolia to the river valleys of Eastern Europe. A realm so immense that messages would have taken months to cross on foot or horseback under ordinary circumstances. Yet the Mongols devised something extraordinary, the yam, a sophisticated relay network that allowed messages, orders, and intelligence to travel with unprecedented speed. Imagine a traveler riding tirelessly across windswept plains, arriving at a station where a fresh horse waits, and another rider takes the message further, leapfrogging across thousands of miles in a matter of weeks. These relay stations, or Gertag, were marvels of organization, well stocked with food, housing, and trained personnel. They supported the speed and endurance of the empire's couriers. The yam was not just a postal system. It was the lifeblood of administration, enabling the great Khans to govern vast territories, mobilize armies, and maintain authority over distant lands. Merchants and travelers also benefited, provided they carried proper authorization or paisas, small tablets granting them access to resources along the way. In some regions, the network extended into the frozen expanses of Siberia, where dog sleds replaced horses, a testament to Mongol ingenuity in adapting to extreme environments. Records indicate that when the Great Khan died in Karakoram, word reached Bataclan in Central Europe within just a month, a feat that would seem almost miraculous in other eras. Kublai Khan, in his Yuan dynasty, expanded the system further, creating hostels for officials and ordinary riders alike, maintaining thousands of horses, oxen, and boats to ensure the continuity of communication. The efficiency of the yam allowed for a degree of cohesion in an empire, where distance and terrain could have easily fragmented authority. But it also raised questions. How did such a vast and complex system endure through the chaos of conquest, rebellion, and the sheer unpredictability of nature. And more intriguingly, what if the lessons of the Yam had been applied beyond the Mongol borders? How might the flow of information and culture have reshaped the medieval world even further? The answers lie hidden in the tracks of countless riders, in the worn paths between relay stations, and in the faint echoes of a network that connected continents long before the modern age of instant communication. Sit back and imagine a world where distant lands were no longer isolated, where merchants, envoys, and adventurers traversed thousands of miles, carrying exotic goods, ideas, and stories across deserts, mountains, and rivers. The Mongol Empire, through its unprecedented unification of Eurasia, transformed the Silk Road into a living artery of trade and cultural exchange, a network that pulsed with movement and opportunity. Under the protection of the Khans, merchants could travel farther and safer than ever before, their caravans winding through the steppes of Central Asia, the bazaars of Persia, and the bustling ports of China. Precious silks, spices that tingled the senses, jade, ceramics, and gold flowed along these routes. But perhaps even more valuable were the ideas, technologies, and knowledge they carried: astronomical charts, medical texts, maps, and religious philosophies traversing continents as freely as goods. The Mongols encouraged this exchange through merchant partnerships known as ortak, where Mongol elites financed trade ventures, sometimes even serving as lenders or tax farmers, binding commerce to the political structure of the empire. Figures like Marco Polo ventured eastward, narrating their journeys in awe-inspiring detail, while Chinese monks and envoys like Rabban Bar Soma traveled west, bridging cultures and continents in ways previously unimaginable. The roads themselves became marvels, maintained meticulously with relay stations, fortified passages, and official protections that minimized the risks of banditry or political obstruction. Yet the Silk Road was not merely a highway of wealth, was a conduit for transformation, reshaping societies, economies, and even cuisines across Eurasia. Some historians argue that the Mongol facilitation of trade contributed indirectly to the devastating pandemic known as the Black Death, which traveled along these same routes, a chilling reminder of how interconnected the world had become. Still, the benefits were immense. Empires grew richer, cities flourished, and the world seemed, for the first time, smaller, more accessible, and more mysterious. Imagine the vast caravans stretching like moving rivers across the desert, camels laden with silks, spices, and gold, while distant minarets, temples, and towers marked the way to civilizations unknown. And yet, one wonders, what if the Mongols had leveraged this network even further? Could the exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods have accelerated the Renaissance, altered the course of Europe, or even connected the Atlantic shores decades before Columbus? The Silk Road, in its Mongol-era glory, remains one of history's most enigmatic and transformative arteries, a testament to how conquest, commerce, and curiosity can reshape the known world. As the dust of conquest settled and the cries of war faded across the steppes, the Mongol Empire left behind a world indelibly changed, a tapestry of cultures, trade, and knowledge woven across continents. Sit back and picture the echoes of Mongol rule lingering in the architecture of Karakoram, the temples of Yuan, China, and the observatories of Persia, each a silent witness to an empire that stretched further than any before it. Beyond the tangible monuments, their influence seeped into administration, commerce, and science. The Mongols introduced systems of governance that allowed conquered peoples to maintain their customs and religions while still answering to the central authority of the Khans. A pragmatic flexibility that allowed diverse cultures to flourish under a single rule. Their postal network, the Yam, ensured that information moved with unprecedented speed, connecting capitals and courts across thousands of miles, fostering diplomacy, commerce, and intelligence in ways that would inspire later empires. Traders, scholars, and adventurers moved along the Silk Road under the Mongol umbrella, carrying not only goods but ideas, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and religious philosophies spread more widely than ever before. Some researchers suggest that the cross-cultural exchanges fostered by the Mongols set the stage for the European Renaissance, seeding knowledge that would later ignite a transformation in art, science, and exploration. The Mongol impact is also genetic and demographic. Studies trace millions of men across Asia to the lineage of Genghis Khan, a living testament to the reach of his empire. And yet, this legacy is shadowed by destruction. Cities were razed, populations decimated, and the specter of terror was a tool as real as the sword. Estimates suggest tens of millions perished under Mongol expansion, reshaping landscapes, societies, and even the environment. It is a paradox. An empire capable of connecting worlds and advancing human knowledge, while simultaneously leaving trails of death and devastation. Modern borders, cultures, and languages bear traces of Mongol influence, from Russia to China, Iran to the Middle East, and even in European awareness of distant lands. The question lingers, almost hauntingly. Could humanity have achieved its global connectivity sooner if the Mongols had survived longer or expanded further? Their legacy, both light and shadow, invites us to consider the thin line between creation and destruction, innovation and annihilation, and how a single empire can alter the course of civilization forever. And as we ponder the vastness of what they built and broke, one can't help but wonder, what if they had sailed beyond the horizon to the unknown waters of the Atlantic?